Lebana weekend, baby, which is it's been a weekend, baby, in Haitian Creole. Because for all y'all who don't know, in Toronto, there's a big weekend called Carabana. LeBron James is a frequent visitor of Carabana weekend, where it's just a giant Caribbean festival. It's also Veld, which is a giant music festival. So I'm going to start this podcast off by asking you, are you going to be catching a wine at Carabana this weekend, Ciaran?
It's a PG podcast, bro. No comment.
A wine is like, it's just a dance move, bro.
All right.
It's all good. You're good. I assume the answer is no.
I'll be at Carabana.
Actually?
Yeah. I go like almost every year.
Live, bro. You pay the $50 for entry?
I do not pay the $50 entry.
I will not snitch. Welcome back, everybody. We're the Shift Gear podcast. Thank you for being here. And this week we got a special one for you. We're going to be going through all of the world's decks we've ever played, which I think in between us is 11. You've 8, right?
This is going to be my 8th. This is going to be my 8th. So I played 7. I think you've played 3.
So we have 10.
We have 10.
I've had 3. This is my 4th. Yeah. We have 10. Okay, so we got 10 big formats to walk you through. And what's actually kind of cool is they're actually mostly unique. Because you played when I wasn't playing and I played when you weren't playing, kind of. So we have, I think, 8 unique ones, which is going to be cool. What we're going to do, and the point behind this video is we want to kind of take you guys through our thought processes for past worlds. This can apply to current worlds. This can apply to your next tournament, whatever it is. But why did we choose the decks we played? Where did it land us? What kind of tier were they in? That's kind of info we want to provide here today. But first, I want to give a little bit of background on this hat. I bought this hat from a nice Zambian man off the street, or so I think he's Zambian. He was somewhere from South Africa, like in that area. And I don't know, sometimes game just recognizes game, bro. He just looked at me and I looked at him and I was like, I got to buy a hat from this guy. And I said, bro, how much for the hat? He goes, $15, boss, just for you. The just for you strat when you're selling, to make you feel special. I fell for it so fast, bro. It's like, yeah, just for me, love. $20. Now I got this nice cultural hat on my head. It's very loud and very vibrant, but I think it's quite fitting for Carabana weekend.
Yeah, you look good.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate it. We got to get you in some hats sometime, bro.
I know, I do. It's funny. I have so many hats. I just don't look good in hats unless they're backwards. And my hair has to be long enough. Right now, I can wear backwards hats, but fresh off a cut, I can't wear hats.
Get a fade, you can't wear hats.
Yeah, once I get a fade, it's hats.
Actually, dude, anyone who watches this probably thinks I wear hats 24/7. I really don't.
Yeah,
most of the time, I'm not wearing hats. I just put it on for this freaking podcast.
You wear baseball caps sometimes, but
yeah, not Bucky's like this. Only when I'm in Brazil, you know, that's the right time for it.
No, you pull them out when they need to be pulled out.
Yeah,
you know when it's
there are
appropriate.
certain situations where you need a Bucky, right?
No, you have that mastered when the Buckies need to come out.
Appreciate it, big dog. So let's hop into this. So, we'll go through chronologically. So our first Worlds was both 2013.
Yep.
We were both youths, as they would say. Both in seniors. I think you had one more year of seniors after this.
Yeah.
And I didn't, I think.
Yeah, because you're a year older than me. So.
Yeah. So we're both youths. This is our first Worlds. We didn't really know what was going on, but we kind of figured it out as we went. So let's go through this. So first of all, why don't we do a quick snapshot of what the meta was, just so people kind of get some context, and then maybe we can jump into what we played.
Yeah, I think back then there was 3 big decks. It was Plasma, it was called TDK, Thunderous Deoxys Ciaran. There was Darkrai EX, which was literally just Darkrai EX, sometimes playing Absol and Sableye. And then there was Blastoise Keldeo, which was the one really popular evolution deck. There were other evolution decks, as we'll get to. But to me, those were the very clear big 3. They were all tier 1 decks, and I think everything else was kind of a tier below that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so going into that Worlds, we were very new. We didn't really know what to expect. We were kind of just on the hype of hey, man, we made Worlds. It's pretty sick. And honestly, that's a great place to be sometimes. Sometimes you just want that innocence. So we both went in and we played different decks. Let's start with yours. Why not? Let's go with yours. Why did you choose it? What tier do you think it kind of fell in? And how'd you do?
I mean, I played the namesake of this podcast. I played Shift Gear Kling Klang. So yeah, some backstory. I won Canadian Nationals that year with Kling Klang. So the Kling Klang deck had a very strong matchup against the Blastoise deck. It was pretty much an auto win matchup. It was probably slightly favored into the the Plasma matchup, and then it was if the player was good, you were probably slightly unfavored into Darkrai, but it was seniors, so you were probably favored into it. So I played like a pure steel version at Nationals, and then for Worlds I played like the rainbow version with like Keldeo, Darkrai, and Terrakion EX. Because I like, oh, this gives me more flexibility, it gives me like more damage output, because the original version of the deck was basically a tank deck, or like a stall kind of heal deck. So you had the Cling Clang with Shift Gear, which was ability was move your energies as often as you like. You would play Max Potion, it was heal all damage from one of your Pokemon, but discard all the energies. So you would move the energies off, and you would heal, and you'd put them back. And then there was another Cling Clang where its ability was Plasma Steel, where it's your metal Pokemon couldn't be damaged by Pokemon EX. And Pokemon EX kind of ran the format. So against decks like Blastoise, you could almost completely wall them out. Against decks like Plasma, they only had one Pokemon that could attack, and it was weak to metal. Darkrai EX is obviously a dark type, or an EX, so it couldn't hit you. So that was kind of the strategy, but the deck was very slow. Like, it had no energy acceleration. It was very, like, linear. So I played like the rainbow version, which I think looking back was kind of a mistake because it kind of added some liabilities to your board, stuff like Darkrai, Keldeo, Terrakion. Like, they weren't steel types, they weren't protected. So I think the deck was probably like a tier 2 deck. It was definitely a very anti-meta deck, but it was definitely like the type of deck where it's like, that was my best deck, that was my signature deck. Like, there was no way I was going to Worlds and not playing the Cling Clang deck. That was just like my baby. So
yeah, makes sense. Then how'd you do with it?
I went 5-3. I bubbled out of top 32. I think I started like 3-0, which was really good, and then I lost like 3 in a row, and then I think I won my last like 2. But I definitely remember, like, after reflecting, like, I definitely probably wasn't a strong enough like player. Like, I probably lost some of those games because like I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I can't even remember what I played against. I remember I lost a mirror to some like guy from Germany who was the most like high energy kid of all time, who's like chugging like 3 monsters during my game. Like, he was playing Geraldine, like that was Skyla's like German name. It was like I just remember that kid. He was funny. I don't really remember my other games that much. I remember like when I got knocked out or when I lost my 3rd game, I was like really, really sad. Then I had to like rebound and like finish strong and all that. But I just remember the first Worlds, like I was just so excited to be there. Like, it's just like it was a step up from any tournament I've ever been to, like the convention center, like all that. So no, it was like still a good experience.
So to recap, you played essentially a tier 2.5 deck, we'll say.
No, it was solidly tier 2. Like, it was a good deck.
Solid tier 2, okay.
Yeah.
So you played a tier 2 deck. You hit mostly what you expected, and the outcome was probably, looking back on it, mostly what you expected.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think the meta was like that great for it. Like, there was like this Gothitelle deck that got really popular. That was a really bad match for Cling Clang. Oh, that's also why I remember I played the Keldeo version. There was like Ray Eels became kind of popular, did well that tournament. They played like this Victini. So like Cling Clang was one of those decks like you needed a very, I guess, like top 3 heavy meta for it, because it kind of like lost a lot of the like other tier 2 decks. And I just like I don't think the meta was like right for the deck.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So looking back on that, so like guys like us who've been playing the game for long enough, we have those experiences where we're like, okay, we look back on X, Y, and Z, and we kind of shape the future and shape what we play based off of what we did. So that's kind of the same case for me. So I played Darkrai Garbodor at this World Championships, and that was, I'd probably say, a solid tier 2.5. Darkrai EX was unbelievable, but Garbodor was not the number 1 partner for it. It ended up top 4 in Worlds, which is surprising.
But that was not really Darkrai Garbodor. That was like a Sableye Garbodor control type deck.
Sort of, yeah.
He only played one Darkrai, the guy who got top 4. Dustin Zimmerman?
No, I think he played 4, dude.
No, I think he played 1.
There's 2 of them. Are you sure?
There was Takuya Yaneda. He made top 8 with Darkrai Garb. But
maybe that's what I'm thinking of, where there was a guy playing 4. There's like a normal build there.
Yeah. Bro, I literally just went to PTCG Legends to look it up, and the site's gone. Alex Wilson wasn't playing. It's actually down. That's so sad.
Anyways, RIP PTCG Legends. Hopefully it comes back one day. But I played Darkrai Garbodor. I played, what did I play at Nationals? I played Plasma Nationals to the top 4 there, and I felt really good. But going into Worlds, I wanted to play Darkrai, and Darkrai Garbodor was not the normal kind of, how could I say this? It wasn't an expected deck that anybody thought they would see, is what I'll say. The partners don't really seem like they have synergy. Like, you're shutting off Dark Cloak, you're shutting off Russian in a format with a lot of Hypnotoxic Laser. So I kind of went in that tournament hoping to have a little bit of a surprise factor. I started 0-2. It was already, we're already in a ditch, and I battled my way all the way back. 5-2. I was in my winning end. And I've told this story a lot of times, but I ended up prizing 4 Darkrai EX in my winning it. And I had an Absol. I clawed back. Absol was the only 5th other attacker in my deck, so I had a 5th attacker. Able to claw back, got down to 1 prize, and I lost against Plasma. Very favorable matchup, but just wasn't meant to be there for me. So that was a 5-3 for me. I think it actually altered my Pokemon career a lot now that I look back on it. Like, I think if I win that matchup, like I probably should 9 times out of 10, I think I would be more committed in the years that follow, which we will get into in a sec. But seeing success on the world stage probably would have been pretty big for me in that moment. To recap, I played a tier 2.5 deck, expected to win off some surprise factors, did. Got probably the expected value that I thought I would get going into that tournament, but I also think how naive I was about Worlds and how much I kind of discounted who I'd be playing against kind of helped me. I wasn't really overthinking things and stuff like that. So that was a big learning experience for me, that the surprise factor can kind of carry you pretty far, and kind of having that experience was huge for me, positively and negatively, as I went into the next few years of Pokemon. And for context, that year, Darkrai did win Worlds. It was very, very popular all over the place, and Darkrai was definitely the correct play, looking back on it.
Yeah, I think your play was correct. I think it's kind of interesting that I think the season that followed, like 2014, like Darkrai Garbodor actually became like the more popular way to play Darkrai. And then eventually like this card called Yveltal EX came out, and then Yveltal Garbodor became like the popular way to play it. So it definitely felt like it was a little ahead of its time. Because I don't think a lot of people who played like Blastoise, for example, like they didn't really respect Garbodor. Like they'd play maybe like 1 Tool Scrapper, like if even. But I'm looking at the top 4 lists for Masters. Like it's like 1 Tool Scrapper. Like so once they play that, you can lock them for good with another tool on the Garbodor. So I definitely think you had a cool play. Like I think if I could go into that tournament, like with my skill level now, like I would probably play like Darkrai Garbodor. I'd play like the Sableye Garbodor deck, and I think like that would be probably like a good play to like get through like seniors. There's some cool decks too. Like some of my good friends, like Arjun Kodze, Jeremy Gibson. This guy, he doesn't play anymore. His name was Alex Hedge. They played this like Terrakion EX Garbodor deck. They got top 8, top 16, top 32 at that Worlds too, which was just like a funny deck. Yeah.
Back then there was a lot more space as well for like just like random jank doing well, because you didn't have like the resources.
Yeah,
no one would really see it.
List formats are fine.
Really leak, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think like Masters that year was a pretty like, I don't know, it was a pretty interesting top cut. Like I said, we had the Sableye Garbodor deck, the Darkrai Garbodor deck. There's a lot of Plasma. There's like a Blastoise deck, a Ray Eels deck. There was some controversy with with that Worlds too for Jason's third win. Against the Ray Eels, there was a questionable end bait allegedly in that top
random receiver.
Yeah, but no, it was really cool. Our first Worlds. I think I had so much fun. Like back then, I was still a kid. Like I was going around like getting my playmat signed by like all like the world's best players. I would go up to like anyone random and ask them if they wanted to play with me, like if they're from another part of the world. So I think it was my first Worlds. Like I'll always have like a special place in my heart for it, and like it's still to this day probably my favorite like actual like Worlds.
For sure. Yeah, so after 2013, this turns into a bit of a Ciaran monologue because I was very turned off of the game until about 2019. But correct me if I'm wrong, did you play 2014 Worlds? You did, right?
I played 14, 15, 16. I didn't play 2017. I played 18, 19. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into
the
monologue.
Now you're just interviewing me now, I guess.
I'm here for the ride, bro. I honestly like that whole like Worlds thing just tasted me so much that I wasn't really like too interested, and I got back into it in 2015, and then I was like, I don't want to do this. So this is fine. This is good. Like this is also learning for me too. So take me through 2014 Worlds. What was kind of on your radar? What did you end up playing? How'd you end up doing?
Yeah, 2014 was interesting. So going into Worlds that year, I think Yveltal Garbodor was like everyone thought was like the deck. Like the meta was very narrow. Like there weren't that many good decks. So I think Yveltal Garbodor was like kind of like everyone's like de facto like tier 1 deck. And then we had this interesting card called Pyroar that came out in like Flashfire, the set, our most recent set. It got second. Michael Pramlock got second at US Nationals with it, where its ability was basic Pokemon just like can't attack it. So you could kind of like wall a lot of strategies. So the idea is like if you play Garbodor, you can kind of shut it off, go through it. The deck was a little clunky, the Pyroar deck. So everyone was kind of like on edge if like Pyroar was going to be good or not. Which was like a very interesting dynamic in the metagame. So there was another deck, the deck that ended up dominating the tournament, Virizion Genesect. People kind of like, I think, disrespected it a little bit because they're like, oh, this deck loses to Pyroar. So you just can't play it. because one, like it's all basics, and two, it's like a grass type deck, so it's weak to fire. But what ended up happening was like people just didn't play Pyroar, and then like Virizion Genesect just like dominated the tournament. Like top 4, I think, was like 3 Virizion Genesects. Top 8 was like 5 or something. So it was like actually like really, really interesting. There were some other decks, like Plasma was still a deck, but it was probably tier 2. Blastoise was still a deck, it was like tier 2. There was like an Aromatisse Kangaskhan deck that was honestly like rogue back then. I wouldn't even call it tier 2. And then there's a deck I played, it was like Flygon, Excelgor, Dusknoir. Definitely a tier 2 deck. It was one of those cases of like I really loved a deck in an archetype when like I probably should have just played a better deck. It was one of those things where I'm like, oh, this deck is cool, it's fun. There's a Flygon where its ability was like between turns, put 1 damage on all your opponent's Pokemon. There was an Excelgor where it's like you would shuffle it back into your deck, and your opponent's active was poisoned and paralyzed, and most decks didn't play a lot of switching cards, so you would kind of just trap stuff. Then there's a Dusknoir where you could move all the damage on your opponent's field however you like. So it was kind of like a lock, like spread deck that I really liked playing. The problem with it was a little bit inconsistent, and it also had trouble finishing like games in best of 3. So I went like 4-2-2 that Worlds. That was my last one in the seniors. I think again it was one of those things where like I just like should have played a better deck. But I had this thing, and like you guys will see the trend where like I love playing like these like tier 2 jank decks that like I find fun and fit my style. So that's kind of like my deck selection process for that one. I played it at Canadian Nationals that year as well. I got top 8. I kind of got screwed in my top 8 match, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, so like that was kind of that Worlds. The cool thing about that one was like Andrew Strada won that World, so I just remember like all the Canadians being there, watching his finals match when he won, like him like jumping into the crowd. That was just like a really fun moment. That was like our first champion like in Masters. Actually, our only ever champion we've had in Masters. So that's probably what I remember most from that Worlds.
And it's like it's kind of cool. Like, you look at these old lessons you learned about like how Pyroar was kind of not really public enemy number 1, but everyone thought it'd be a lot more prevalent than it was, and it just wasn't. And it opened the door because Evil Tall Garbodor kind of countered it. It opened the door for another deck to kind of do well that would normally lose to it. And like you relate that to Worlds now. I mean, there's lessons to be learned that you can relate to right now, currently, right? Like there's a lot of people who think Gardevoir might be the most played deck at Worlds because everyone's hyping up Charizard, everyone's hyping up Drago, and like Gardevoir is just there, right? So the reason I think we even wanted to make this video in the first place is because like there's a lot of lessons you can kind of take forward, and I think that's a big one. But that was kind of your namesake, taking these tier 2 decks that maybe sometimes tier 3, these jank decks, and really playing them to the ground. But that I think is a lot cooler thing than being a Meta Slave. Yeah,
like honestly, I think about it, and I'm like, man, I would have like won so many more tournaments in seniors if I literally just played whatever the best deck was instead of like trying to win with all these like random stuff. Actually,
I think it's also considered though, like it's important to consider that our skill levels were different.
100%. It was just like I just made things like way more complicated than it needed to be with like my deck choice half the time. And you'll see that trend kind of continue into like my early stages of Masters. But speaking of power, we didn't talk about this in 2013 too, but US Nationals was dominated by like this Gothitelle Excelgor deck, where Gothitelle's ability was like when it's active, your opponent can't play items, and then Excelgor is the one I just explained that I played in my deck where you would paralyze people. So you'd item lock and paralyze, so they just couldn't retreat. So going into that Worlds, everyone was like, oh, like that deck is like the one to beat. So everyone just played 2 Keldeo EX in the deck, which its ability was just like rush in, so you can put it in the active and then retreat. So like, 1, Gothitelle just like flopped at the tournament, and like 2, just people just didn't play Gothitelle at the tournament. Like it's again like a lot of times like these hype decks, like people like are ready to counter them, so people just like don't play them at all. So it's like kind of like a game of like cat and mouse or like game of chicken. If you should counter some of these decks when you're heading into like a world championship, which is I find always.
And
really
you have sleepers too. Like right now, you have Snorlax as a sleeper that could just come in and sweep. Right, like it's the total opposite. Like if Snorlax was the number 1 most popular deck going into this Worlds, I think our preparation is completely different to what it is now. So that's a good point. I mean, Gothitelle Excelgor was there.
Yeah, exactly. So cool.
All right, let's hop on to 15. Let's kind of tear through these like random tier 2 experiences and.
Well, 2015 is actually one of my favorite Worlds. And this is the World, I think, if things went a little differently. I actually really believe I could have won this one. So 2015 was my very first year in Masters. I had like an okay season. Like I pretty much got points at all my regionals. I made top cut at Canadian Nationals. And I made top cut at Canadian Nationals with this like Raichu Crobat deck. where you played Skyfield, which is actually pretty similar to that terrestrialized stadium we looked at last week, that like you got 8 bench Pokemon. Then Raichu's attack was you did 20 for each of your bench Pokemon. So you would have like 8 in play, so you would do 160. Most EXs had like 180, the Megas had like 210, 220. You would play like the Crobat line, so the Golbat was when you evolve it, plays 2 damage counters somewhere. Crobat was plays 3 damage counters somewhere. So you would kind of use the Golbats and Crobats almost as like these damage modifiers, then Raichu to like one-shot everything. And you would play Shaman to like draw more cards and like fill up your bench. And if your opponent like countered the stadium, you would just discard your Shamans because like they were liabilities anyways. So that was my favorite deck. I played it at Canadian Nationals. But heading into Worlds that year, 2015's metagame was like super diverse. It's probably the most diverse metagame I've ever played at in a World Championship. Like there wasn't really a clear best deck. It was maybe like Seismitoad Crobat. Seismitoad Garbodor had just won Nationals. There was this like Wailord Stall deck that's I guess kind of like Snorlax in a way. That like got second at US Nationals. That again, this is the continuing the trend. Everyone's like, are people going to play Wailord? Do you need to tech for it? There was a Benelby that like shuffled cards from your discard into your deck. If you literally played one copy, you like auto won Wailord. So again, it was a game of like chicken if people were going to play Wailord or not, and people really didn't play Wailord. There was like a Mega Manectric deck. There was like a Donphan deck. Like there was like a Groudon deck, a Primal Kyogre deck. Like there's just all these different decks. And I remember this was the very first year they did that day 1, day 2 format that we use pretty much up until this current season. So I only had a day 1 invite. So I wasn't really sure what to play. I wanted to play my Raichu deck, I remember, for day 1. And I can't remember the reason why I didn't. I just remember there was some matchup where I'm like, oh, it's really bad and I think it's going to be popular. So I played the Primal Groudon deck, which I thought was like a safe pick. I'm like, this is like the safest deck I could play. Primal Groudon, it's like it had this like thing called the Ancient trait where it's like it's not affected by trainers, so your opponent couldn't gust it. So you would literally sit there and you would just power it up with manual attachments, and then you would try and like sweep the game with one Primal Groudon because its attack basically knocked out everything in the format. And you would sit there with this card called Robo Substitute, where it's like if your opponent knocked it out, they took 0 prizes. You would play Wobbuffet, where its ability was like if it's in the active, Pokemon don't have abilities besides psychic types. So I played that deck mainly because it like basically auto won against Seismitoad. And I just thought it had a lot of solid matchups. And I remember it was 7 rounds that year. You had to get 15 match points to make day 2. So I remember, I think I started the tournament with a tie against like a Seismitoad deck. So I'm like, well, that doesn't feel good. And then I remember like I ripped off like 3 wins in a row. I played one on stream against like a Night March deck, which wasn't a good matchup. And I made a 6-1 comeback. I'll never forget that one. But I think I was on like the side stream, so I never got to like watch the VOD after. And then I remember like I tied another game to like mirror or something. I won like a crazy game against Donphan, like to go 402. So I remember I was 402. I'm like, sweet. Like all I have to do is ID and I make it into day 2. I was the only person at 402 to get down paired, so I had to play. And it's funny, I got paired against my friend Jeremy Gibson, who we were like friends at the time, but like not as close as we are now. So it's like kind of funny. He was playing Seismitoad, and I remember it was funny. So like every table around us was like, "Yo, if we go to time, do you guys want gentlemen's?" Blah blah blah. And he asked me that. I'm like, "Absolutely not, bro." And, yeah, I didn't know what he was playing, and he flips over a Seismitoad with a Trubbish, and I was like, "Thank God." I'm like, "Let's just like this is just an easy, chill matchup." I remember I won game 1, and I'm like, "All right, there's like no way like I like lose this series." So then I made day 2, and normally when you make day 2, you just play the deck you got through with day 1. You just play it again because it got you, you know, you like, you danced with the girl you took to the dance or whatever, that type of thing. But I was really like, I saw what the metagame was like day 1. I'm like, oh, I actually think Raichu is in like a good spot. I can't remember what its bad matchup was, like that kind of like didn't perform that well.
Was it Landorus?
Oh yeah, it was Landorus Crobat.
Yeah.
So that like deck didn't really show up. That was one that people were going in, like hyping. So I was like, you know what? Like, I think it's time to play Raichu. I think it's a great meta call. And it really was. Like, I played it with this, like, what's the Leaf, Eevee? Leafeon? I played it with Leafeon. I played it with Leafeon. That's crazy. Leafeon's attack was, like, for each energy in play, like, your opponent has do 20. And it was literally just there to counter Seismitoad. Its second attack was, like, 60, but if you played this card called Silver Bangle, you would do 90, and you would, like, one-shot Seismitoads. And then you also would one-shot like Groudon EX, you would one-shot like Kyogre. There's all these things you would one-shot. So that was kind of like my tech for the meta there. And the tournament would like started off super well for me. Like I played against Pablo Meza round 1 playing Groudon. Like I It's like an auto win. I crushed him. I remember like round 2, I played against like a Seismitoad deck. Like Leafeon just went to town. I won. Round 3, I played against like this like Aromatisse deck, which is honestly like the freest matchup ever. And I'll never forget, I flipped like 4 in a row turns. I stayed asleep. Like this guy played this card called Malamar deck. When you attached and you would go to sleep, you're active. Yeah. And I just kept falling asleep and like I couldn't wake up. It was like so frustrating, and I was just like bricking, and I was like, damn, I shouldn't have lost that one. Then I recovered my next round, and I started 3-0-1, and this tournament was only 7 rounds. You had to go like 5-1-1 to bubble into cut, and I started well, so like my resistance was good. And I played against this Mega Manectric deck, which is honestly a really, really good matchup. And I just remember like game 1, I just like complete bricked. I'm like, all right, whatever. Game 2, like I set up, I win. And then game 3, like I'm just like bricking again. And I'll never forget this. I was playing against this like Japanese player. He like literally puts a Verseeker from his hand down and just says N. And he puts his hand on top of his deck. And he didn't start shuffling yet. And, like I didn't put my hand back. I just like pick up this guy's discard pile. I'm like, bro, like there's not an N in your discard pile. And like this guy's like losing his mind because like he's probably like, going to get a game loss or whatever. So we call the judges over. And I explained what happened. And I said to the judge, I'm like, he put his hand on top and didn't shuffle. And they're like, do you know how many cards he had? And I'm like, well, he played Research last turn, or I guess it was called Sycamore back then. He played this. So I'm like, I think he should have 5. And I remember the judge like picks up like the 5 cards from his deck. And like the last card was like N. So he had an N in his hand. But I guess he went to play Verseeker instead by mistake. So then like the judges are like, well, okay, like if you're sure he had 5, like he has an N here, so he can like play this instead, like it's reversible. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And I honestly think back on that, and I was like, that was the right.
You're too honest.
That was like the right thing to do. But yeah. I'm like, damn, like if I just didn't say anything, or like he just started shuffling, like I probably could have like made top 8 or whatever. So then he ends.
Well, the thing is too, like I don't know, like we don't promote dishonesty. I think if you knew for sure he has 5 cards, you tell him like, yes, he had 5 cards.
Yeah.
But just the fact that you're like somewhat uncertain was probably reason enough to just say I have no idea.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, I could have like I don't think anyone would have faulted me for saying I have no idea. But I remember like I'm like, I knew he had 5. Like I have to say something. But I remember I told everyone after, and they're like, bro, like you should have just let him get a game loss. Like, and then he plays N. And
most people would have done the same thing to you.
Yeah, and then I didn't get rewarded for my honesty. I just like bricked and lost. Like such a good matchup. And then I remember my next round, like I faced like a Seismitoad deck. And then I just like bricked again, and I lost, so I was out. And then I won my last one, and I finished in top 32, which was like a great result, right, for my first year in Masters. I finished like top 32 in Worlds. I made it through day 1. I got like the cool messenger bag you get that I still have. It's like this leather thing. So that was my first, I'd say, like successful Worlds where I had like a really good result. Like I thought it was really cool to go through like day 1. I felt like that was my first time really like proving myself, because I feel like I was a successful senior, but I hadn't had like that success in Masters to like establish myself yet. So I definitely felt like that was my first Worlds where I'm like, okay, like I'm starting to like put things together. Like I'm starting to compete with the best. Like, so that was a long rant about that year's Worlds, but yeah, that was my first.
I just let you
Worlds.
Go, bro. Yeah. You're bare passionate. just go, man. Wrapping it back up here. So lessons learned. How can we apply this to 2024 Worlds? Besides be a shark.
Honestly, like I think it's like make a good meta call. Like if I would have made top 8 of that tournament, there was like Archie's Blastoise, which was an auto win. There was like 2 Night Marches, which was like an auto win. There was like 3 normal Seismitoad Crobats, which were honestly all like fine matchups. And there was like the only bad matchup was this like Dawn Fan deck. So my lesson for that one is like, if you have like a strong anti like meta call and like you're really like certain about the meta, like fire it. Like that's the type of deck that can win Worlds. Like that year Worlds was won by this like Archie's Blastoise deck that honestly like no one respected as a meta deck. Everyone thought it was kind of a meme. And retroactively you look at it, you're like, oh, this deck actually like bodies like most of the metagame. And Jacob Van Wagner, the guy who won, like he recognized that. He's like, this deck's not really receiving any hype, so it's not receiving any hate. I know how to play it well. Its matchups are good. Like if I hit the right stuff, like I'm gonna have a deep run. So I think that's maybe the lesson from this year's Worlds is in like an uncertain metagame, like you can look for these kind of like decks on the edges. And if things go your way, like you can definitely have like a deep run.
For sure. Yeah. It's good to wrap it up like that after our 20-minute rant or whatever we just went on. But yeah, honestly, like you learn your lessons as you go. I think being a shark is not what we encourage, but I think there are times where it is somewhat beneficial. If you don't know for sure, like in that situation, I don't think I would know how many cards my opponent had, and like just being dead honest, like could have 6, could have 5. Like obviously you want to rectify the game state the best you can, but you have to do what's best in your own interest sometimes as well, as much as it does stuff.
I mean, like I don't really regret it. Like I knew like that. Like I knew for sure once I thought about it rationally that he had 5 cards. I was like, okay, like.
You would have felt terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
You like actually shark the guy, right? Like there's morals to this.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was an interesting year as well. I remember I did play a little bit that year. I think I fell like 20 CP short of Worlds because I didn't play anything but Nationals.
Bro, that was ridiculous. So Aneil made top 4 at Nationals that year, and they used to always have, if you make top 4 at Nationals, you get an auto invite to Worlds. That's like the only year in the history of Nationals when you and I played that top 4 didn't get an auto invite. And since you didn't play any tournaments that year, the points weren't enough to get you into Worlds.
And so that was reason number 2 why I quit the game. So there's Worlds 2013, and then there was that. And I was like, all right, I'm done. So that was the end of Aneil until 2019. So take us to 2016. What kind of happened? Maybe we'll start shortening these as we get like farther on, just so we can give a bit more modern advice. But give us a little synopsis.
Yeah, 2016 is interesting. It's up there for like one of the worst World formats I've ever played. I think it's a lot of people's one of their least favorite formats. If you watched our like worst cards video or whatever, like this format had cards like Forest of Giant Plants and Vileplume. So like on turn 1, you could like evolve to Vileplume and like lock your opponent out of items if you went first. There was like a Trevenant deck where like if you went first, you could like play this card called Wally to evolve the Trevenant and your opponent couldn't play items. The best deck was this deck called Night March. It was like a deck with like single prizers that could one-shot anything in the game on turn 1. It was just a really, really toxic format. So going into it, people were just like, hey, well, how do you beat all these toxic decks pretty much? Like, the decks were just trying to, like, out-toxic each other, almost. There were, like, a lot of really fun decks in that format. There was, like, this metal deck. Actually, I got second in Canadian Nationals with the metal deck. There was this, like, Mega Rayquaza deck that was awesome and fun that our friend Simon won Nationals with, but it just couldn't beat Night March. There was, like, this Water Box deck that was, like, solid, but it was just, like, almost too fair. And then the deck that ended up winning Worlds that year was, like, the Mega Audino deck, which is, like, honestly, in my opinion, like one of the worst decks to ever win Worlds, but
yeah, I think you're right.
And there was this like Greninja deck too that was like new based, or that wasn't new, but like it got some cards in the new set that like made it better. So I think going into Worlds that year, everyone was kind of just like, okay, like this seems like a Fiesta format. Like, do I just play one of these toxic decks and hope it goes my way? So this year for Worlds, I did have a day 2 invite. I had honestly probably one of my best seasons. Besides last year, like this was probably my best season ever. I top cutted every single like major I played. I got second at Canadian Nationals. I finished number 1 in championship points in NA. Mainly because Canadian Nationals gave the same points as US Nationals. And it was a smaller tournament. I definitely did not have the number 1 season that year. So yeah, going into that Worlds, it was an interesting dynamic for me. So I didn't have to play the first day of competition. And like that's a huge advantage. Like 1, I don't have to like win 6 out of 8 rounds to make day 2. But 2, like I get to see what decks everyone's playing. So like, I kind of get an idea of like what the metagame is going to be like going into day 2 for me. So yeah, I played that metal deck at Canadian Nationals. So it was based with this like Bronzong. It had the same ability that Flaffy had, like where you can put metal energy from your discard. It had this like Aegislash card where it's like it can't be damaged by Pokemon with special energy. You played this Genesect where it was like you did 100, and then for each metal you discard, do 20 more, which it doesn't sound that good, but back then you could like one-shot pretty much anything if you had enough. So I really liked the deck, but it definitely felt like it had bad matchups into a lot of these toxic decks I just described. So Canadian Nationals that year, people just didn't figure out that like Night March was that good. Like no one played it. But going into Worlds, everyone's like, okay, well you need to beat Night March. So I decided I'm just going to play one of these toxic decks too. I played the Vespic and Vileplume deck. So basically the appeal of that deck was if you went first, you could just get the Vileplume out and item lock your opponent. If you went up against like Night March, which was the best deck, their whole strategy predicated on a couple key item cards like the Battle Compressor. So I was like, well, like honestly, Worlds is a tournament where you need to run hot. If I run hot and go first a bunch of times, like I'll just win my games. And I remember like I wasn't that skilled at playing the Vespiquen deck. I literally only played it like a couple days before the tournament. So I think that was like a pitfall for it. But the deck wasn't that difficult. I ended up going like 4-2-1. I got top 32 again. So like back-to-back years of top 32. But like I got eliminated pretty early. I think round 5 I like lost my second round. So I was like 2-2-1. And I just like won 2 in a row to finish positive. I had one of my most memorable matches ever. My like winning in for top 32. I was playing against like Waterbox and my opponent like bossed my like Vileplume, and he thought he was just gonna like deck me out because he had one more card in his deck than I did. So I remember sitting there like I was like acting all distressed, whatever, and then eventually I got to 0 cards, and I played this card called AZ, which is basically just Turo, and I benched like this Bunnelby, the one I said earlier where you could shuffle a card back. It also had another attack where you could discard the top card of your opponent's deck, and its effect was you could use the attack twice. So I went to 0. My opponent had I think my opponent had 2 more cards than me. So I'm like, all right, AZ, Bunnelby, deck you out, and I won. And that was one of my most just like memorable games, just like randomly.
Man like Oz, bro.
Man
Oz
like
is a
Oz,
Toronto
yeah.
legend. Oz is a big Toronto legend, bro. If any of you guys don't know, so people in Toronto do this weird thing where like after normal words, they'll just add the letters A and Z. Like if Ciaran was like, if I was calling Ciaran a bean, he'd be a bean Oz. Like it's so stupid, but it's something that like these guys used to do a long time ago. So Oz became a meme pretty fast. I mean, like, I guess that wasn't really around when Oz was a card, but I guess now that we look back on it, anytime we play those formats, we're like, yo, let me get some Oz. So that's the story of Oz. So lessons learned from that world. So you said you picked up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think like my thought process was fine, like playing a high roll deck. I just think I didn't practice enough, or I wasn't familiar enough with my deck. But I still think it's like the advice is like right. Like if you find like a deck where like maybe if you're not like as skilled or like you're not sure what to do, like if you just pick a deck where you put a little bit more of like luck in the chamber, like that's an approach you can take. Like honestly, like if one more round goes my way, like I could have made top 8 like very easily at 5-1-1. The deck that did end up winning was Mega Audino, because this guy just like hard countered like a couple decks. His approach was basically Shintaro was like, I'll lose to like most of these decks, but I'll beat like the most popular ones. So I guess the lesson you could take too is like if you think the meta game is going to be very narrow, like you're very confident you're going to face these decks, or if you make it to the top tables, it's going to be mainly these decks. If you're willing to like gamble that if you face anything else you lose, you can have a very successful tournament. And that's the type of thing you kind of need at the World Championship. So as back-to-back years where rogue decks won the World Championship, which was pretty interesting actually.
So that's actually a good point. Like, cause like I feel like now it's a lot harder to do well with rogue decks.
It's definitely much harder. Yeah.
Yeah, like and it happened back-to-back years. Where do you think those decks sat in terms of meta countering versus surprise factor?
So I think in 2015 the Blastoise deck, people knew it was a deck. So I don't know how much it was like surprise factor, because it's not really like hard to play against. It's just like I think that was more metagame. Like it's just like you flip that over, the deck just goes crazy. Like it's a Blastoise turn 1, and then they start just doing damage. I think the Mega Audino deck was like more of a combination of both. Like honestly, like if you flipped over Audino EX against me at that tournament, like I actually don't know if I would have known like what the Mega did like right away. So I think that for sure. Because also his list, Shintaro's list, like it played like healing cards and stuff. I think it played some disruption cards. So I think people honestly had no idea like what to expect when going against it. The Blastoise deck was fairly linear. It was just like all items and attackers. But the Audino deck was very like weird in how it played. So I think that one was definitely a surprise factor. And I think maybe if you go back and like give Shintaro's opponents some like knowledge of what his deck list was and how it works, like maybe they could have had different results.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, I think that one was definitely more of a surprise factor deck in combination with countering the meta.
Yeah, and like every single year you go through and you see these results, I think you learn more about how you can apply it in the future. So this is all good information. So 2017, you said you did play and you did not play 18?
No, so 2017 was my first year at university, and like I had this like idea in my head that I'm like, oh, I need to stop playing Pokemon because I need to focus on university, which honestly, like I did not need to do. I could have played Pokemon.
It's not true.
So like I could have made Worlds that year. I only played one regional and I played NAIC. I got like top 64 at NAIC, and like I remember going to my points in the season. I'm like, wait, like NAIC gave me this many points. Like ICs are broken. I should have just gone to League Cups. I would have made Worlds. Also, I had a travel award to EUIC because I was like, they were like, oh, if you were top 3 or 4 like in your continent, you get the travel award. And then like I had exams like during EUIC because they put it literally during like Christmas break or exam season, and like my professors were like, no, you can't defer these exams. And I didn't really understand that you could just get like a sick note or something, so I didn't go to EUIC. But looking back, if I had like a time machine, I could talk to like 17-year-old Ciaran. I'd be like, bro, like what are you doing? Like,
I mean, there's a lot of mistakes we made. We don't want to get into the boxes we've ripped.
So anyways, I skipped 2017, which is kind of sad because it was actually a really good year. Like I think I would have really enjoyed a lot of the formats in the back half of the year in that Worlds. But yeah, like 2018, I did play that Worlds. So
I also played 2018 actually. Like I only played NAIC, but I played. I day 2 to NAIC, and I was like, wait, I should have just played the whole year, similar to kind of how you did it in 2017.
Yeah,
that was a good format though, and so
great format.
Going into that Worlds, everything was kind of diverse. I do remember this one pretty vividly. Kind of take us through what your thought process was.
Yeah, so 2018 was the year of Zoroark. Zoroark was very clearly like the best deck. Zoroark Garbodor was clearly the best deck. It ended up winning the tournament too. So I remember going into that Worlds. I didn't like playing Zoroark. I played this Gardevoir GX deck like the whole year. I loved Gardevoir GX. I was like so good at playing Gardevoir GX. I think I got every single championship point that year with Gardevoir GX. But it's just like it wasn't in a good spot for the Worlds metagame. So I remember I'm like, well, I need to find another deck. And I just did not enjoy playing Zoroark, which I think is funny because I think most people like playing Zoroark. And honestly, Zoroark's kind of my style, I feel like. So I ended up playing this like Magnezone deck. That's...
Did you actually? I didn't even know this.
Yeah.
The Magnezone Solgaleo thing?
Yeah, it's like Chien-Pao basically, but worse. So Magnezone literally has Baxcalibur's ability, but for metal Pokemon. You guys are seeing a theme that I love playing stage 2s with like either Rain Dance or Energy Transfer or something, just some funky ability. You had this Duskmane Necrozma. It was like 4 energy, do 230. That was enough to knock out pretty much almost all the GXs back then. So it was kind of like your Chien-Pao. Then you had one of my favorite cards of all time, the Dialga GX. Its attack, its GX attack, it's very similar to the V-Star. It was 150, take another turn. So the deck was really, really cool. And when it set up, like you did have good matchups to Zoroark. So I remember I played 4 Field Blowers to like blow off like the Garbodors, Floatstones, and all that. You had this stadium called Mount Coronet where it was like energy retrieval for metal. You had this like cool play where you could like Mount Coronet, Field Blower it away, and play another one to get you more energies. So the deck was just really, really cool. The problem with the deck was it was a stage 2 deck. It was a little inconsistent, and it had some shaky matchups that when you face stuff that wasn't Zoroark. And going into Worlds that year, the new set brought this card called Rayquaza GX, which was like probably the most hyped deck of the tournament. And it did show up in numbers. It was one of those things where people are like, are people going to play this? Like, it's the new deck. And it really did show up, and it did perform. It was a good deck. So I played that deck. I was like 402. I think you had to go 6-2 to like make it in. And so like I was playing this get round. Like if I win, I go 502. I can just ID in. And I was playing against this Rayquaza deck, which was like an okay matchup. And I'll never forget. I was playing against this girl in like game 3. She went first. She went Marshadow, Let Loose, then like set up her board, pass. And I just went draw, pass. And she's like, all right, draw, attach, knockout. And I'm like, well, I am knocked out. So
it was a good run.
It was a good run. But yeah, I think my takeaway from that tournament was like I probably again played like a tier 2, honestly probably a tier 2.5 deck that tournament, which was bad. And what I should have,
I'd say even tier 3. Dude.
Yeah,
in that format.
Yeah. I probably should have played Malamar, and Malamar was interesting because Malamar was a deck I really liked. It auto lost to Zoroark Garbodor, which was the best deck. And it's funny, so Jeff Colink got second that tournament. Obviously, there was some controversy after, but regardless of that, like, I knew, like, the list, I had the list, like, he was going to play, like, I knew, like, the Canadians who made it, like, all this stuff. And I was basically, like, I told them, I'm like, yo, like, you just auto lose to Zoroark, like, I don't want to play this. But looking back at it, like, I remember, like, talking to Jeff and, like, some of these other people, and, like, their rationale was, well, I beat literally every single other deck in the format, and I lose to Zoroark. So if I face Zoroark, that's fine, I'll lose. But I'll beat everything else. So if Zoroark is 15-20% of the meta, I can face 1 in Swiss, I can face 2 day 1, and I can still run through the tournament. And I remember the list, it was built mainly by this, I guess, Canadian legend, Edward Quang, that most people won't know who that is. He just built
crazy to me.
Yeah, he just built such a great, streamlined, aggressive list. Like, there was no N in the deck, which was something, like, no one would ever think of. It was super fast and aggressive. So, like, looking back, I was like, honestly, like, that was actually, like, a perfect meta call. Because I remember everyone was like, oh, like, how do you make finals? This deck sucks. You don't beat Zoroark. And I mean, like, the exact same thing, the thing happened to him. Like, in Swiss, like, day 1, like, I think he faced, like, 1 Zoroark or something. He made it through. Our friend Adrian also made it through with the deck. Day 2, he faced 1 Zoroark in Swiss. He lost. Then he beat all the things that weren't Zoroark. And then top cut, he didn't face Zorogarb until the finals. So I think an interesting lesson there is like, if there's one deck that people respect a lot, and like people kind of discard these other decks, so like, well, you can't beat this one deck. Like you can kind of just be like, I'm fine like losing if I face that deck, but like just I'm taking good matchups into everything else. Like let me punt a matchup. Like I think sometimes people get too focused on beating everything instead of being like, why don't I just make my matchups better against everything else? And I remember I played in this. They had this thing called the Nashville Open, which they did this tournament for a while, where they had this like regional on day 2 of Worlds for people who weren't playing day 2. And I played the Malamar deck, and I went 6-2. I lost twice to Zorogarb. And I was like, yeah, this deck literally feels unbeatable as long as I'm not playing Zorogarb. So that's my takeaway, my lesson, is you can sometimes punt some matchups and just be like, hey, like, if I face it, it's not my day. If I don't face it, like, I'm going to be riding the wave to the top tables. So.
I think that's really important. Yeah, like, even today, like, that goes into our consideration. It's gone into our consideration last few Worlds, especially now when, like, it's weird because, like, the tournaments get bigger and the skewing of, like, what gets played doesn't really change. It's always going to be probably that 1 in 5 most of the time where you're going to hit a certain thing. Like, right now I'm thinking Zard might be your 1 in 5, so maybe you go into Worlds, you take a loss to Zard, and you say, if I hit it, I hit it. At the end of the day, you're going to need luck either way. Yep. So that's a good point. All right, cool. 2019.
This one we can breeze through. This is probably the Worlds I cared like the least about. So this was an interesting year because not only did they do rotation for Worlds, they like released a new set. So basically like everything we were playing with that year kind of got thrown out and like it was new. And this is when the tag teams came out. So if you've ever listened to the Shift Gear, like, you know, like my disdain for the tag teams. This is my least favorite Worlds format, like I've ever like played in. So I just remember like I had no motivation to test this year. Like this was the year the Raptors won the championship. I was chilling. I was just having a good time. Like Pokemon was like kind of secondary. It was in Washington again, which I've already been to for Worlds. Like I didn't really care that much about the location. So I remember I showed up to Washington that year, and I just had no idea what to play. I played this like bad Malamar deck, and it's interesting because like Malamar like flopped really hard at Worlds despite being like the most played deck. But then afterwards, when people refined the list, it actually became like a tier 1 deck in the format. But no, this Worlds was just like terrible. Like there was like the Mewtwo deck, there was like the Fire decks, there was the Pidgeotto control deck that kind of debuted at this Worlds. So yeah, I honestly like. My takeaway from this one was I just didn't practice. And, like, I had some, like, grief opponents at this Worlds, to be honest, bro. Like, if you guys want grief, should I give some grief stories from this Worlds or no?
If they're culturally appropriate?
No, they're just funny. Like, okay, like, I played against round 1, this one guy, and we played Malamar Mirror. And it was a really close game, and he beat me game 1. And game 1, I'm not exaggerating, took probably, like, 45 minutes. And this guy pile shuffles his deck 3 times between games.
Nice.
And I'm like, all right, like I'm just getting like slow rolled here, and I was just like, I called the guy out on it, like obviously, and then like I called the judge over, and then like the guy wasn't like he used like Japanese, so he's like, oh sorry, like this is what we do in Japan. I'm like, bro, there's no way you guys pile shuffle 3 times like between games.
3 times.
And I'll never forget. Yeah. He starts with like Inkay or something, and he just on his first turn he went like draw pass. I'm like, okay, evolve knockout. This guy picks up his deck, shuffles it 3 times, and presents it for cut. And I was like, oh, bro, like, you know how to shuffle now. And then I'm like, okay. And then, like, obviously we tied after that. And then I remember, like, round 4 or something. I think I was, like, 1-1-1 or something. So if I tied or I lost, I was out. And I played against this guy. He's playing Pikarom. And we're going into game 3. There's, like, 3 minutes left. And the guy's like, do you want to do a gentleman's? And I'm like, my deck is a slow setup deck. Like, I will never be ahead on prizes, right? But I'm like, well, I don't really have a choice. So I'm like, all right, let's gentlemen's. And this Pikarom deck, the guy just like bricks, and I just like knock out his Pikarom. And like the guy literally doesn't say a word, circles tie on the slip, and like leaves. And I was like, okay, true.
Insane.
It was also this guy, like for people in the community will know, like he ran like a pyramid scheme and all this stuff. I'm not gonna like name drop him specifically, but if you know, you know. He's like this European guy. So yeah, that was that Worlds. It was some pretty forgettable Worlds for me. I had a lot of fun, like hanging out with like I went with like my friend Camille and his family, so I had a lot of fun with them. So I actually enjoyed the Worlds, just not the Pokemon part. But yeah,
it do be like that sometimes, bro. It do be like that. Yeah, and then after that, we didn't have a Worlds for 3 years.
No, and the next Worlds is actually one you were at, and I wasn't at, Aneil. The next one was the 2022 Worlds. So
I don't know why I played that year. I really don't, but I did.
Well, because it was a two-parter, right? It was like the season started before COVID, and then it kind of like extended after. So you can kind of give the story about your return to Pokemon.
Yeah, I didn't really play the season before. I was in a terrible spot. In like resuming, we had 3 months to make up, I think it was like 400 CP. Got it done, got the stipend for the next year too. It just went crazy that year. But going into Worlds, and this was a recurring theme, unfortunately. So all 3 times I've been to Worlds, I actually played the deck that won Worlds. This is a crazy player diff, I guess. But I do think my greatest strength as a Pokemon player is metagaming. It always kind of has been. I always understand like kind of what's going on, and this was, I think, the good example of that. I played Arc Pika Crobat to Worlds. Going into it, it was my first Worlds in 9 years. I was like kind of just there for the ride, in London, having a good time. But Arc Pika Crobat just felt right. There's a lot of stuff going around. There's a lot of Palkia. And my thought process was, if I play Palkia 5 times, I can beat Palkia 5 times, and I can coast into day 2. And what's funny is all 3 of my Worlds, I also just lost to a win in. So I finished 1 win short of day 2. So this is another situation where that happened. Kind of coasted through. A lot of Palkias. I did lose to one friend of the podcast, Dan Hugard, did beat me with Palkia. It wasn't the freest matchup in the world, but it was pretty strong in general. And then I got to my win in against Raymond Long. And we're playing almost a perfect 60 mirror, except he played Decidueye, Hisuian Decidueye, which hits my arcs for weakness. And that story ended pretty fast. So the one lesson I learned going into that is trust how you feel in your gut. Like, the deck call was correct. It absolutely was, but I over-teched. I was playing too many things. I was trying to beat too much. I think if I just like focused on beating Palkia, maybe played a thicker Pikachu line or played a couple more lightning energies, like, I think I do fine in that tournament. I played a random Crobat VMAX and a random Crobat V to just counter, I think it was Mew at the time or something.
Or like, Mewtwo V Union, maybe?
Yeah, probably that too.
Yeah.
There was some reasoning why I should have done it, and I did it, and it ended up losing me games. So I think the lesson I learned there, and it was really important, just kind of streamline it, beat the best deck. And I knew Palkia was going to be like a 30% deck, and it was. So a lot of lessons learned there, but that was kind of the synopsis of that Worlds. Very uneventful.
Yeah. Did you like that format? Like, I thought that was like one of the worst World formats we've had.
It was so boring, dude. It's so boring. Like, Irida, Subspace Swell, Inteleon. Like, dude, like, it's so boring.
Yeah.
And then that was like, so that format and the format after, the Lugia format, were like the two like S-tier V-star formats. And I hated them both equally. And like, at that point, after Lugia, I was like, why do I play this game? Like, this is not fun. And I think after that, Pokemon made a good change. They made non-S-tier formats, and ever since then, we haven't looked back. It's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Lugia format, but I know most people don't.
That format was especially frustrating because it just felt like there was nothing you could play that countered Lugia properly.
Yeah,
I think that was the worst part. Like, Palkia had a glaring weakness, like, play Flying Pikachu, you will beat Palkia. Lugia just didn't have that. There's too many tools in that toolbox that you just couldn't beat all of them.
Yeah, no, I agree. Cool. All right, then the last Worlds, it's actually one we both played. So we got our most recent World Championship, the 2023 World Championship. I think this is probably like the coolest Worlds, like with it being in Japan and all that. This was definitely like the Worlds where I'm like, all right, like this feels like a World Championship. Like, it feels like I'm at something special. You know, walking around Yokohama, like they have all the decorations, the streets, like they had like just the art installations, like their Ferris wheel, their park. Like, it was crazy, this Worlds. Like, when you say, like, Worlds has aura, like, this Worlds definitely had the aura.
Bare aura, yeah. Bro, yeah.
Like, the opening ceremony with the drums, I was like, all right, like,
yeah.
Like, this is, I'm like, you know what, let's just have Worlds here every year, bro. Like,
it was one of those moments where you look at it, you look in the mirror, like, we are so back.
Exactly,
like, crazy. We're so back right now. This is, like, Pokemon roots right here, dude.
Yeah.
It felt good. That was a fun Worlds. I think the only issue with that Worlds overall was, like, the overcrowding, which I think was expected.
But yeah, that was expected. I mean, that just seems like it happens every Worlds now. Or every major.
The format was fun.
It was
overall,
I liked
like,
it,
I think, no one had any gripes with it. It was fun. Crazy run from Torrid to the finals, but maybe, okay, why don't we start with what you played? You had a day 2 invite this year, so it was a bit simpler. But in general, why'd you play what you played?
Yeah, I think going into the tournament, so I have to like rewind to NAIC. So for NAIC, I basically just needed to get points to lock up top 16. So I was working on this like Chen Pao deck, and I was like, oh, I really, really like it. Like I cut the V-stars, like, but I was just scared because I was like, I don't know if this is good enough. Like it's like a risky deck. It's not consistent enough. Like I don't know if I can guarantee myself points. So I kind of like tabled it and I just played Gardevoir to make sure I got points and locked up my top 16 invite. And I gave the deck to my friend, like Jeremy Gibson. He got top 32 or 64. Man, I've named dropped Jeremy a lot this episode. But yeah, he played the first iteration of Canadian PAL. He was like the guinea pig. And I kind of got his feedback. I got to see what the meta was like. And I was like, okay, like I think Chen Pao, like I think no one's figured out how to build it properly. I'm like, this is going to be my Worlds deck. I remember legitimately, like, after NAIC, I'm like, this is what I'm playing at Worlds. Like, I'm not practicing anything else. Because I remember, like, after rotation that year, I had a lot of trouble. Because Lugia got nerfed, and, like, I really didn't find a deck that, like, I like to play. But I'm like, I love playing this deck. I think it's under, like, repped. I don't think people, like, respect it. I don't think people have figured out how to build it yet. So there was, like, this, like, cottage weekend. Like, Lucas and Grant Shen were there. And then that's kind of where, like, the original, like, finalized like Canadian PAL kind of got built. And I had Lucas and like our friend Simon Luong like test drive it for me in day 1 of Worlds. Simon made it through. Lucas started 5-0 and then he lost 3 in a row, unfortunately. But I'm like, all right, like I know this deck is like good. I knew it was inconsistent. So it's going back to that kind of thing where I'm like, I know Worlds is kind of like a high roll tournament. I'm like, you know what, if things go my way, like this deck could go deep. And it kind of just like all my losses and ties. I got top 32 again. I went 4-1-2, I think. How many rounds were there? I can't remember. No. I went 4-1-3, I think, or something. I think I went 4-1-3. Like, just all my rounds I tied were just like, I bricked one of the games. My opponents just like played for a tie. Like, the one loss I had, I prized, I remember Radiant Greninja against like Giratina. And I just like lost because I didn't play heavy ball. And that was bad deck building on my part because I was just like, well, like, the odds of prizing Greninja are like 9%. Like, it's not that big a deal. And I remember that round, I prized it twice. But no, the deck felt really good, and it really felt like if some things like went my way, like I could have had a like deep run at that one. And I think this is that was probably the Worlds, like besides the Raichu year, where I felt like the happiest with my deck choice. Again, like a tier 2 deck. Like I don't think I've ever played a tier 1 deck at Worlds. But yeah, it was a solid run. I still stand by my deck choice.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I ended up playing Mew that tournament. I was coming off a top 16 in Milwaukee with Mew. I was feeling good. I did do NAIC with Giratina, so I did have a lot of second thoughts as to what I should play. The one thing I will say is I went into that tournament knowing if I hit Spiritomb, it's going to be a short day. I knew that. Like, that was kind of like the hand I was dealt, and I was like, okay, I'll deal with it, right? Like, It is what it is. And unfortunately, I did hit 5 Spiritombs in day 1 out of 8. I fought my way all the way through. I got to, I think it was round 7 or round 8 where I gentlemen's, and I just gave the guy, I lost the gentleman, so I gave the guy the win. But that was a risk I would take all over again. It was a calculated risk, and I think I would do it all over again. Like Vance Kelly proved, you can do that. And like his list was a bit more refined for Spiritomb. I just played 2 fusions and an Elisa just to kind of bail myself out. He's playing the whole like Meloetta thing. So he was a bit more refined for it. I was more so I'll take my risks. Like if I hit it, all good. But I hit it and it didn't go too well. I did fight through 3 of them. I lost to 2, and that was enough to kind of bum me out, and I lost to a Gardevoir. But the main thing I think I took out of that was Mew going into Worlds was in a weird spot. It was in a spot where people were kind of refuting its legitimacy a little bit. It was kind of like the weird limbo where people were like, is this real? Is this not? There's Spiritomb, there's Drapion, there's Path. Like, why is this still a thing? And, like, at the same time, it felt like it was one of those, like, underrated kind of tier 1 decks that no one really thought about. Like, the way I would equate it right now is maybe, like a control right now, where people aren't really, like, thinking about it fully, but it feels like a tier 1 deck overall.
Or maybe, like, Charizard at NAIC meta. Like, that type of vibe it gives me.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Somewhere like that. And, like, felt like people weren't respecting it, so I was like, okay, let's just do it. And, like, it just didn't, it didn't line up for me, but, I mean, I don't have any regrets in that sense. And I think being in Japan, the whole World's experience itself was so good that I was like, I'm willing to take a risk here. And I think, honestly, going to Hawaii, like, I'm thinking the same thing. Like, I'm willing to take a risk. I'm here on vacation. I'd love to have a deep, deep run with something. I'm not there to just kind of squeak in a 6-2 and then get bodied in day 2. Like, that's not really my idea of fun. So, I'll probably be playing some risky again. Want to metagame a little bit better than I have been this year, but I think this metagame is a really hard one to predict. I think in general, like there's a lot of people being secret. There's a lot of decks that are very, very good. I don't think there's a definitive S tier, and especially with these new cards coming out, like they do change a lot. So the one thing I kind of wanted to segue into before we hop off here is like, how do we apply these lessons to current World Championships? What are the biggest things maybe you're thinking about going into this Worlds that you think maybe you've learned from past Worlds?
Yeah, I think maybe like just trust myself as a player. Like if I just play a consistent good deck, I feel like my rounds are probably more in my hands. Like this isn't like last year where like I'm playing day 2 where it's like I'm playing basically like the best people in the world every round where like the skill diff is like pretty marginal. Like this is a year maybe where like, you know, like you can have a really strong day 1, like there's gonna be like not to sound like arrogant or anything, but like weaker opponents like, you know, like in the field than there would be in like a day 2 type thing. So honestly, maybe consistency is probably something to value more this year, especially since you need to make it through day 1. You have to go 6-2. Like it's not like Worlds of like last year, like in the past of day 2, where it's 7 rounds. Like you only have to like high roll 5 times. Like this one, like it's gonna be like 11 or 12 rounds or something total. Mm-hmm. It's pretty hard to like get lucky like that many rounds. Like just like the way probabilities work, like you're probably gonna break like a very decent amount. So. Yeah, probably the lesson is probably play something consistent, and probably the lesson is like maybe look for a deck that's like on the edge, that's like a little undervalued, under-repped, like not respected, but like has some good matchups that, you know, if it's your day type of deck.
Yeah, I like that. I think like the one thing I would say about last year too is I felt like I skill diffed a lot of my opponents, like genuinely, and I would just punish because my deck building was not as strong as my play that day.
I remember your list. I was like. Yeah. That's an Aneil list.
No, but that list ended up actually doing really well. Like that list was all over day 2, the second day, and it was bad inherently. I still think it's bad. Yeah, it was. There's a lot of people playing.
You didn't play the fusion package though. Like you didn't play the whole fusion. No, I'm saying like the whole fusion package. I feel like that's the muse that did well. Didn't they all play the fusion package?
There's a lot of people in day 1, day 2 who were playing a couple of fusions, and that actually like retained after Worlds as well. I'm not saying I was a pioneer of it, but it was definitely just a thought process that people were having. And, like, yeah, of course, it was a little jank. And, like, I look back on it now, it was a little jank. But I think there's a lot of places where you can put yourself in a better situation to succeed, which I didn't do in that sense. Like, I wasn't trusting the consistency of my deck. I was trying to do a little too much. I should have just relied on myself and understood that, like, I'm in a tournament with 700 other people. Like, this is not, like, an exclusive Worlds where everybody's, like, completely goated. Of course, everybody at Worlds is a very, very good player. But I think when you're going to day 2, you have to have a different mentality than you do in day 1. And I think I had a day 2 mentality going into day 1. So that was a big lesson for me. I think there are a lot of tournaments this year where I got skill diffed, but like there are times where you have to recognize where you're at and how comfortable you are with the deck. Like when you're bouncing around from deck to deck to deck, obviously it's harder to kind of do well. But when you have a deck that you've been playing for a long time, so like you with Chempower, me with Mew at that time, like you can rely on your skill to kind of get you through, right? So I think this year is kind of going to be similar to that. Like there's going to be a huge crowd. I think the most important thing to think about is what you said. Like you have to be kind of consistent. Rely on yourself to kind of get yourself through. There's a lot of rounds, a lot of things that can possibly go wrong. So as much as like I do think it is a high roll tournament in general, like Worlds always is, it is going to be important to kind of get out of day 1 unscathed, and you're going to have to prioritize consistency a little bit. But I think going through all these lessons that we've learned over the Worlds, and kind of sharing it with people hopefully provides a little bit of perspective as to like how we can use history to bolster the future, so to speak. Do you have any final advice for anybody kind of Worlds here?
I mean, if it's your first Worlds, I'd say definitely enjoy and take it in. Like your first Worlds is definitely special. Like I promise you, if you go to Worlds again after the first one, it'll feel very different. Honestly, like if you get nerves, like that's normal. I'd say Worlds is the only tournament of the year that I get nerves for, and then like I have to play my first round, like I settle in. But you're gonna probably get nerves at this tournament. Like it just like it's hard to describe, but like the aura of Worlds is just different. Like you can feel it when you're there. It feels special. Like it feels different. Like you have the ceremony. Like But yeah, like honestly, just go have fun and enjoy it. Like Worlds is just such a special tournament. Like everyone's from around the world. It's like the most production, like high production value of like the whole season. It's in a great place this year, like a beautiful place. So I think regardless of like the Pokemon, how it goes for you, it should just be a fun time.
Yeah, this is what we said in the Shuffle Squad video too. We're like, just have fun at Worlds. Like Worlds is supposed to be a spectacle. Enjoy it as such. I think my final pieces of advice would be play something you're comfortable with. I think that's important, especially in this format where there's a lot of decks that are kind of on an even playing field. Play what you're comfortable with. Play what you think is doesn't have to be a tier 1 deck. You just have to be good with it, and you have to be able to beat 6 people out of 8. And I think a lot of people have a lot of experience one-tricking things, and I think this is a great time to kind of show it off.
Yep.
But with Worlds, we will be with you the whole way. We have, 2-3 more weeks of episodes? I think we have 2 more weeks properly of episodes. Yeah. We'll be bringing our stuff to Hawaii, I guess, to record a shift here from Hawaii.
Are we? I don't know if I'm bringing my stuff to Hawaii, bro. That might be
We're not skipping a week,
that might be a record off a laptop microphone episode.
That's crazy.
Or my phone has a good microphone. I'll record it off my phone, bro.
Honestly, I'm down to buy a mic there and just full send it.
All right.
Like a $50 snowball.
You can do that.
Business expense, bro.
It is
I'm doing it for the listeners' ears,
That is tax deductible.
We have not missed an episode yet since we started, and we are not planning on doing so.
Well, I think maybe we'll record one before we leave. Just a fun episode that's not topical, and then maybe release that. I don't know. Or we'll do a jokes episode. Shift here on the beach or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you guys let us know, man. What do you guys want to see while we're in Hawaii? I think it'd be kind of jokes to do something stupid, but if you guys want to hear something serious, we can definitely put that together as well. But as always, thank you so much for being here. I know we've rambled a lot. If you have any questions for us regarding the Worlds formats, anything that we failed to consider or anything that we missed, let us know. And I think the question of the day from us to you is, what was your favorite Worlds format? Let us know why. If you say 2016, we're going to block you.
Or 2019, I'll block you too.
Yeah, we're going to block you, but respect. Until next week, we will see you all then. Thank you for being here. Peace out.
Later.